Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I read an article in the paper this past week that I was really quite fascinated by, and it said that Canada urgently needs to abandon its outdated free trade strategies for a managed trade approach. The author was Arthur Lamb. He's the founding partner of Nexus Strategy Consultants. He's a former senior advisor in the Federal Trade and Industry Minister's office, and he's actually had a corporate background before working in government. And with free trade and tariff wars and interprovincial trade barriers and all these different issues, I thought it'd be interesting to chat with someone who's really thought about this and written an article about it. So, Arthur Lamb, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian.
So, tell me, what are we doing wrong, and what do you think we need to do?
Well, I think there are a lot of issues here in terms of what's happening in trade, and the key thing is that we've relied on free trade for too long.
So in 1988, we had this free trade election. Brian Mulroney argued for it. John Turner argued against it. And we had a hard-fought election. It won. We instituted free trade, and most Canadian companies have benefited from it by, increasing the volume of their production by exporting to the United States primarily. Why is that wrong?
That is not wrong necessarily. It's just that things have changed. You're coming to an era where the idea of free trade, which is tariff-free trade and lowering of barriers, has already maximized its potential globally. A lot of countries that we are trying to do business with, they can handle the competition that's coming from complete free trade. So what I'm arguing is that free trade has maximized its potential. It just means that we just have to be more pragmatic about how we do business in the future with other countries.
So, some people have said that there's a free trade sort of system and a mercantilist system or a managed trade system. Can you explain what the difference is and why you think one is now more prevalent than the other, or we should be thinking about following?
Well, I think the issue here is that a number of other countries have taken advantage of the free trade model and created this mercantilistic approach towards their industry. So they really focus on the sectors that they are really good at and make products really, really cheap and really, really fast and sell to all over to different markets. And what it happens is that it displays a lot of the industries that is in major countries like US, of course, but also in Canada. So we end up not having those kind of industries and manufacturing that is really essential to the operations of our economy. And what I'm arguing is that complete free trade is not a sustainable model for the world. And we need to move to a managed trade approach to carefully curate our sectors and our industries so that they have a competitive advantage.
So Trump is right.
I think Trump is right.
Fascinating. So some people think that this is effectively what China's done very successfully over the course of the last couple of decades. So do you think that China is managing their economy better than Canada and the United States has been?
I think that China has been very shrewd in terms of how it manages its economy. It has always, like China and India and countries like even Vietnam, they had very, going back a couple of decades ago, in the 1980s, 1990s, their economy is not as strong. Their industries are not as strong. And they're very smart in terms of creating policies and the conditions to invite foreign capital to help build out their manufacturing and build out their industrial base. And at the same time, maintaining a level of tariff barrier, so that companies, other countries can't sell into them. And they build out their internal capacity to create world-leading industries, which is very admirable. Like, they're just very smart about it. I think I wouldn't say that we are necessarily mismanaging. It's just that times have changed and we have to change with the times. We have to now look at the world as what it is, which is we have all these countries with really great industries and we are no longer competitive. So how are we going to recapture our unique value proposition and our unique industries so that they have a seat at the table when selling overseas?
So, uh, the former President Biden thought that chip manufacturing was a key skill base, and he was famously quoted as "You learn by building," and so therefore by giving up, the construction of manufacturing of silicon. Semiconductor chips was a big mistake, and he referenced that Silicon Valley is named because that was the place where silicon microprocessors chips were initially manufactured, and he provided a fair amount of money and incentives for American companies to start producing those chips. Donald Trump has done the opposite, where he hasn't provided incentives, he's provided disincentives for the importation of the chips. He's put tariffs in place. What do you think is the right? If you're going to have this managed trade, if you're going to incentivize, if you're going to help domestic companies in certain areas, do you give them government money by way of incentives like Joe Biden did, or do you put up barriers against people from elsewhere coming in to your domestic economy?
Well, I think for US, this is a strategy that actually works because so both of them are complementary to each other. So the way that US government have decided, the administration has decided, is that um, microchips is an essential critical industry for them, and they need to have production in US. And what happened is that Biden created these incentives and invite companies like TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, to come into US, notably in Arizona, and create a plant to build those chips. To safeguard their industries, their national security, et cetera, et cetera. And that is happening. So, it's up and running. They are now producing very advanced chips, maybe not as quite as advanced as those in Taiwan, but they are now making those chips. Now, what happened with the Trump tariffs is that you raise the bar on importation of chips. And what that means is that there's even more incentive for businesses to build the factories and the manufacturing capacity in US. And I would argue that Canada needs to think strategically about what kind of sectors we want to be really good at and figure out a approach that is part of it is funding those industries and part of it is about helping them sell abroad. So it's maybe not as quite as extreme as Trump in terms of President Trump in terms of how he executed, but we need to think a lot about where we want to go as a country. What do we want to sell products and services in the future, and really just like help the industry along.
Okay, so electrical vehicles were one of those entities that I'm not sure about the current Canadian government, but the past Canadian government certainly believed in, and we put in what was it, 100% tariffs against the importation of Chinese electrical cars, and we've given billions of dollars to battery manufacturers and electrical car manufacturers to incentivize the building of an electrical car business. But today, that business is challenged dramatically by two things. People would say, number one, by the tariffs that Donald Trump has put in regards to automotive purchases in the United States of anything made or assembled in Canada, and number two, we got rid of the carbon taxes such that the old industrial combustion engine cars are a lot more economic. And I bought an electrical car, but the payback on it is diminished dramatically now that gas is a lot cheaper relative to buying a gas car. So you tell me, did we do the right thing with electric cars, or is it a waste of money?
I think what no one have saw coming is the dramatic clawback on the on that dramatic change in terms of the trade policy that Donald Trump has instituted. So back in the day, we thought the Canada, US, Mexico agreement was safe. We negotiated with Donald Trump and signed this agreement. And businesses and government think, okay, this is the basis of how companies can make decision now. Hence, we could then put money into EV batteries and manufacturing in the hope that it would create a net new industry or supply, kind of replacing the traditional internal combustion engines cars. But now the issue here is that Trump has gone back on his word. So, and basically what he has done is that he is forcing a renegotiation of the trade agreement 1 year, 1 full year in advance. So it, I don't think that Canadian, the public service and the politicians thought that would be possible. We thought that, US would be good for their word.
What do you mean? In the election campaign, he said tariff is my favorite word over and over and over again.
I think that what people haven't, this is about politics and how things moved. I think there was a assumption that Trump is going to say one thing and then he's going to back down, which he is doing. That the issue here is that his escalation is so much higher that now there's a lot more ways to fall before we go back down to the kind of common to the baseline of operations, I suppose. So I think it's just we thought that there will be more businesses that are vocal that will help shape the decisions that the Trump administration would do, and in fact, that is not the case. So I think that is the reality that we're dealing with, and I think that the car industry in Canada is at crisis for sure, not only for the upcoming EV market, but also for our traditional cars manufacturing. Like if we don't have a US market to build cars for, like, what's the point of that industry? So I think that's a very complex issue that, the Carney government and the Doug Ford government are trying to grapple with right now.
Sure is. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with our guest, Arthur Lam, talking about free trade versus managed trade, whether we should be putting up tariff barriers or incentivizing industry, whether we've got the right strategy. And one of the intriguing things that Arthur talked about in his article was that the vast majority of small and medium-sized companies in Canada, he thinks, actually followed a bad strategy. And maybe when we come back from a break, I'm going to ask him about that. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest tonight is Arthur Lam. He is the founding partner of Nexus Strategy Consultants. He's written a really provocative and interesting column in the newspaper that talked about Canada urgently needing to abandon its outdated free trade strategies. And really, he's saying we should adapt a managed trade approach. I was shocked by this because it's sort of the opposite of what we've all been about for the last, 40 years. It's interesting, Arthur, because, that free trade election we talked about in 1988 was really fought between Brian Mulroney, who was talking about free trade as being a big benefit for Canada, and John Turner, the leader of the Liberal Party at the time, who said that once you give up your economic sovereignty, eventually your political sovereignty will be at risk. It's almost, given what Donald Trump is saying in regards to the 51st state and using coercion, economic coercion to take over Canada, that John Turner was right. It took 40 years or 50 years for his threats to, his concerns to actually materialize. But it's almost as if it's come true. And it's interesting that, and I really want to understand this. You talk about how 99% of the Canadian companies are small and medium-sized companies, and that they made a mistake by becoming reliant on free trade to the United States. And it's almost as if, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but let me ask you about it. It's almost like you said they took the easy way out by selling it to the United States rather than doing what was the smart long-term thing. Tell me about what you're thinking about small and medium-sized companies and their sales into the United States.
Yeah, I think that it's not necessarily a mistake by the small, medium-sized companies, and perhaps not a mistake from a kind of government perspective, because when that deal was struck with, by Brian Mulroney, um, you know, there is an assumption that America would be good for their words, that America understands that Canada is shoulder to shoulder with Americans in terms of their own, all the goals they have in terms of economy, in terms of security. Um, the assumption is that that partnership, that relationship would be ongoing forever. And what has changed is a fundamental component of America First, that they are going to put that Donald Trump and his movement is putting America first. And it doesn't matter if it's allies or adversaries, it's about America first. And that means all kinds of things can go out the window, including the partnership with Canada, which is why Prime Minister Carney have said explicitly that the relationship that Canada rely on with the US is over. And that is just true. So, I think part of it is that when companies have do free trade, there's a lot of consolidation, companies get bought out, create more efficiencies, lower the price of goods and products and services. And that's in general, it's a good thing. But the challenge of that free trade is that a lot of Canadian companies have been sold to US entities because that's how you need to compete, and they don't have Canadian industry leaders here anymore. And all you're left with are these small, medium-sized companies that doesn't have the strength of relationships, the financial, financial capital and the knowledge to compete effectively in emerging markets and Europe and Asia, et cetera, et cetera. So they just go to America because that's the market that we know really, really well. Sorry, you're on mute.
So are you saying that the free trade agreement was actually a mistake, and that you said in your article that small companies became overly reliant, overly dependent on the U.S. market, that we would have been better off by diversifying our trade internationally?
I think, like any investors, and you are in the financial and investment industry yourself, um, being diversified is a good way to reduce risk, right? In business, we know that there is single supplier risk or single customer risk. When your customer or your supplier is over, say, 30-40% of your business, it becomes an issue. And I think when you look at Canada's export value, 70% goes to the States. So we are just over indexing on our best customer. And what I'm saying is that we just need to understand diversification is really important for the longevity and the success of a business. And they need to think strategically about where to go and how to go in other markets.
So it sounds like some of what you're talking about is sort of what some people would call industrial strategy. And numerous people have said governments can't pick winners. And industrial strategy is a waste of money. So what do you say to that?
Well, it's not a waste for China, right? They said they are going to be number one in EVs, and they are number one in EVs. They said they will build their own microchips. They build their own microchips. They want to be leading in solar and wind power generation. They are doing that. That is successful. So it's really about number one, execution. Like how do you create the conditions to advance your industries? But I would also say that for a small country like Canada, like the businesses are really important in terms of being in the conversation. And they need to do a much better job in terms of advocating for what they need to be a leading sector in Canada.
So Tell me, please, what is managed trade and how should businesses prepare for the shift that you're arguing we need to follow?
Yeah, managed trade is basically where government played a much bigger role and determined what to trade with and with whom. Um, it means that certain countries are good for, you know, ABC products that's coming from Canada, and other countries maybe just product A and product C and not B. You know, in many sense, we already sort of have a bit of that. There are export control on sensitive equipment, defense, and AI and the like. It's just an expansion because the world has gotten a lot more complex, and small, medium-sized businesses, when I spoke to them, they don't know where to begin. I've been doing a number of panel talks um, with a lot of innovative companies, helping them think through about these strategies. And a lot of them, they just don't have they don't have they're just busy trying to run their business, right? They are all medium-sized businesses. They don't have that mental capacity to deal with a one extra layer. And what I'm saying here is that um, companies need to be better in terms of telling government where they want to go and have a concrete plan about going there. So agriculture, for example, is a very strong sector in Canada, of course, and they do a really good job in articulating where Canada needs to go to sell the products. That's why there's a new trade office in Philippines because Asia needs more food, and who else better than to supply high quality food than Canada, right?
So, what sector should we be choosing in this new environment that you're describing? You think about automotive. Ever since the auto pack back in the 1960s, we have been building an automotive business and parts business in Canada for a market, the North American market. And when you think about sort of the economies of scale that you could achieve building for a $40 million population market versus a 440 million population market, Canada versus North America. Obviously, it makes a lot more sense if you can build for a North American market. If we have this managed trade situation that you're talking about, where there's huge tariffs on Canadian manufacturing going into the United States, the automotive business is dead, is it not? We can't make money. We can't reach reasonable economics of scale if all we're doing is building cars for the Canadian 40 million person market. Don't we need to somehow have access to a North American market?
Yes, I agree. We need to have some access to the North American market. And the question really is how we're going to have access to it. Um, you know, President Trump and Prime Minister Carney is playing a very delicate dance on negotiating what they're going to do with the auto sector, with the steel and aluminum sector, because there's a lot of dependencies between the two countries, and it's going to be very hard for either party to um, to exit that relationship. Um, so it really comes down to how and what kind of deal they're going to negotiate. You know, understanding President Trump's concern, can we create, can we negotiate something that will address their concern in a way that, it's face saving or it achieves some of President Trump's goal, but, retain a core part of, our Canadian access. I think that is going to be the dance that's going to happen over the next couple of months and perhaps over a year. But it's going to be very hard, as like a lot of the global auto companies are already stopping their production. They have furloughed a number of workers in southwestern Ontario. It's a very challenging. All the businesses are doing a wait and see to see how this shake up. So in the meantime, what we need to do is focus on the areas that we have an advantage. We have we have an industrial base that we can tap into. So of course, I mentioned agriculture, but energy and resources like minerals, etc. Those are key key sectors for us in Canada. But also in the manufacturing space, like there's a lot of advanced machinery that Canada produce. There's a big defense sector here, and life sciences and AI. So we just have to understand how all that will shape up and create the right conditions, right strategy, work with the right trading partners so that we can sell to them and we can get some benefit.
Maybe we should appoint you the trade representative for the Canadian government. It's a real question. Let's talk about some of these sectors. So, aluminum. My understanding is that Canada supplies a substantial amount of aluminum that is used in U.S. manufacturing, and that there's no way that the United States is going to be able to, if within any kind of reasonable time frame and/or dollar figure, replace that Canadian production. And the Canadian competitive advantage is just that we're using cheap hydroelectric energy from James Bay, Hydro Quebec, etc., and that energy just isn't available at those prices in the United States, and so therefore, you think we do have a comparative advantage. We do have that opportunity, and it's clean energy, so it makes a ton of sense. What should we be doing in aluminum when he's taken the tariffs up to 25% and then doubled them up to 50%? Like, what can we do?
Well, I think part of it is that this is a negotiation tactic. Um, a lot of these aluminum manufacturing companies, they have stock, right? They maintain a certain amount of inventory to keep their operations running. And what the Trump administration is doing is that they are saying, okay, we're going to shake up the tree a little bit, his art of the deal kind of approach. Um, and see what the Canadians come back with to try to get some wins from us. It's a bit of
So he's going to hurt our aluminum business just as a negotiating strategy.
yes, that's right.
Crazy.
That is right.
We're going to take a message break. We're going to be back in 2 minutes. We're going to talk with Arthur Lamb, expert on trade, runs a strategic consulting company focused on that area. He's written a really interesting article in the newspaper about us needing to abandon our outdated free trade strategy and think about a managed trade approach. I want to talk about a couple of other issues. I want to talk about energy. I want to talk about critical minerals. I want to talk about, the way we run our economy, because we've had two different strategies over the course of the last couple of years presented to us as Canadians, and we got to choose which way to go. And it sounds like Arthur thinks that government should be playing a larger role in our economy, which a lot of people would disagree with. And so let's chat about that. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Arthur Lamb. He is the founder of an organization called Nexus Strategy Consultants. He's got a long history in trade issues with both the government as well as in private enterprise, and now in consulting. And he's written an interesting article about free trade sort of being yesterday's strategy, and that we've got to think about managed trade today. Arthur, tell me about Nexus Strategy Consultants and what is it and what do you do?
Yeah, we provide professional advice and political insights to help companies better engage with government. Because in this day and age where there's so many changes in the business world, it's ever more important for companies to know how to navigate government, get the kind of procurement deals you want, get the kind of public policy that you want, get the kind of attractive funding you want to grow your business. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of these big companies do that all the time. Major, telecom companies, major railways, major oil and gas companies, they do that all the time. And what we are seeing is that there's an opportunity for medium-sized companies that are, Canadian champions, but need a little bit of support to go even, get to higher heights. So that's why we founded Nexus, because we see that there is this opportunity for Canadian companies to achieve greater success by understanding how to deal with government.
You've got, really quite an interesting background in this area. You were an analyst with Bank of Montreal Capital Markets in trading services, and then you went and worked with Brookfield Asset Management and became a senior manager of corporate development. So you were working with Mark Carney's company. I don't know if you met him when he was there, but it sounds like you spent 6 years working on some of the stuff that people have either bragged about Carney's expertise or complained about his corporate connections. So that's interesting. And then you worked with a company, Equifax, in corporate development, strategic partnerships, and then you worked in the federal government. And you spent a couple of years actually in trade and industry in ministers' offices as a strategic advisor, and then with Communitech, which is a fascinating organization that is out in Waterloo, Kitchener area, talking about innovation and venture capital companies. And then you launched Nexus Crowd. So you've got a fair amount of experience in industry, in corporate development, in government. Etc., and now in consulting. Let me ask you a question. There's been a whole bunch of talk over the course of the last couple of decades about two different ways to manage our economies and manage the world. And some people have described it as the Beijing consensus or the Washington consensus. The Washington consensus would be free trade, IMF, World Bank, these world organizations. Some negative people would call it a globalist agenda, the World Economic Forum, etc. But the rule of law and freedom, deregulation, free movement of capital, labor, etc. And then other people would say, no, the Beijing consensus, which is what China has really been following, which is managed trade, industrial policy, supporting critical industries, government having a far larger role in society and in economics and in business, etc. Where do you come down? Sounds like you're more on the Beijing consensus than the Washington consensus. Is that fair?
I'm a pragmatist, right? Like I had a stint in federal government advising industry and trade ministers, but before that, I spent 15 years in the private sector. I'm all about business. I'm all about the facts on the ground. What works right now is what I'm focused on. And my point in the article is not necessarily free trade is bad or managed trade is bad. No, it's just that we are now living in a world where free trade is collapsing in front of us. You mentioned Washington consensus, and President Trump, really took a hammer and swung at it and destroyed that from within. But even before that, there were warning signs everywhere. The Canada's participation in the CPTPP, which is the Pacific arrangement with Australia, New Zealand, Japan, etc., and Vietnam, that almost collapsed, and early on before the Japanese government and the Trudeau government did a last-minute deal to save it. The WTO. They have a appellate body, which is so that you can appeal for trade decisions and kind of adjudicate disputes between countries. That's been paralyzed for more than 6 years, and our own trade negotiations with China and India, got stalled because of geopolitics and foreign you know, foreign interference, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot. So my point is this, Trump's tariffs is confirming the fact that, free trade, the era of free trade is over.
Is over. Which is effectively, I guess, what Carney said is the security and trade relationship with the United States is fundamentally changed.
Exactly. So it's just about, let's recognize what is real on the ground here. We're moving from the world where the trade rules were set in Geneva, to one that is cut in the boardrooms. And my point is that government will play a bigger role, but Canadian businesses, especially the small, medium-sized ones, need to be at the seat at the table to help guide government policies.
Okay, so let me ask you about a couple of different industrial sectors, if I could. There was this interesting series of articles in the last little while about critical minerals and rare earth minerals, and that China has almost cornered the market in some rare earth minerals. And it's because, and I guess those are critically important to a lot of the sort of high tech things, EV cars, telephones, et cetera, that we're using. And that they did that through industrial strategy, and that, because of the expense associated with building infrastructure, United States and Canada and the rest of the world hasn't sort of invested in that. But we've got some of those rare earth materials in Canada, critical minerals in Canada. They're located in the north. They're located in the Ring of Fire, etc. And we haven't done the right things, at least the things that China has done, to access them and exploit them. So, would you have a different strategy in regards to rare earth minerals and critical minerals in Canada?
I think obviously we have an opportunity to be a leader in critical minerals, and in fact, the government had rolled out a critical mineral strategy of like, I want to say 30, 35 critical minerals, from things that you put in your phone to magnets to EVs, et cetera, et cetera. And we definitely we definitely have the material for it. We also have companies that are excellent miners, Canadian leaders in mining that can do a really good job in exploiting them. I think what no one's really talking about is going to be the processing of these minerals, because they can be very toxic. So, like how do we build a strategy? How do we rebuild this industry so that we can now do more at the back of our in our backyard, but also be mindful of the environmental consequences of these kind of sectors. I think that is a really key thing as we explore this critical mineral strategy. But I think we will have to get there, because obviously you know, as Canadians, we value our sovereignty. We value having control over our destiny, and having access, and having managed our own supply of critical things that we use in our day-to-day lives is going to be really, really important in the
So
next
we've been talking about the Ring of Fire and development of the Ring of Fire for, it seems like, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years, and we haven't done much. And the provincial government in Ontario is now talking about a potential strategy to exploit it. I think it's got to be one of those areas that we put some more money and effort in. And so I don't know whether it's managed trade or industrial strategy or just smart business. I think it's something that we should be doing. Let me ask you a question about nuclear. So, nuclear was out of favor for a while because of all the environmental concerns about nuclear waste. But now nuclear seems to be sort of back in favor because people are seeing it as a clean energy, an alternative to carbon emitting oil and gas and things like that. The two countries that I understand are the biggest resource sources for nuclear energy are Canada and Kazakhstan. Should we have an industrial strategy for nuclear?
Absolutely, we
Why
should.
did we close down the CANDU reactor and Atomic Energy of Canada?
I think that a lot of times when people make these kind of decisions, and I meant, public service and politicians, they are thinking really about immediate concerns and immediate problems. And they see, they may have thought that closing down would be a smart political move, it would be a smart industry move, etc. And I think my point, what I would say is that we need to think a little bit further ahead than the next quarter or the next year. We need to think in 5 and 10 years, like how is shutting down an industry like this going to impact us on the, further down the line. So I am personally very much in favor of building expertise in nuclear energy, especially with the coming innovation in small module nuclear energy. They are much safer. They can be in small. They can be hosted in remote locations. They can be hosted in like small towns, without creating any issues. Like I think we're going to need to get there because that is that is sector that everyone wants. You know, all the countries want more energy because it helps facilitate their economic growth, and clean energy like nuclear is definitely one of them.
I think that one of the examples that you could look at as to what we did sort of along the lines of following the Washington Consensus and free trade and globalization was what our strategy was in nuclear energy, and because some countries really supported their own domestic nuclear energy companies, being France and China, etc.,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
we weren't willing to support our national champions. We ended up closing down Atomic Energy Canada Limited. We ended up closing down really the CANDU, and we gave up this huge opportunity to focus on and use as a national champion a resource that we got, uranium, and an expertise we had in nuclear energy, and an actual, you go back to the by doing you learn. We've got nuclear energy plants, power plants, Bruce Pickering, other examples. I think it was a mistake, and so I frankly think that we should have a nuclear strategy and maybe even relaunch Atomic Energy of Canada. Let me ask you about another one, if I could. We're going to be spending a lot more money in defense. Probably either at the NATO meetings this June or at the G7 or at both, we're going to get a lot of pressure to go to 2% of GDP spending on national defense, which is supposedly what we agreed to do long ago and we just never done. And at the same time, a lot of NATO countries are going to be saying they got to go to 3.5 or 5%. So we're going to spend a lot of money on defense. Historically, we spent most of that money buying American products. Is that the right strategy, or should we change that strategy?
I think that I, I think that given um, what President Trump have said um, about military equipment, I'm not sure if you're aware, but he made an offhanded comment about selling like obsolete products and services in the military to other countries, and also like having the ability to potentially change it or make it malfunction. Um, I think that it is important to be, again,
Self-sufficient.
diversify yes, be more self-sufficient because there's certain things that are unique to Canada. We have a vast landscape. We have, we're surrounded by three oceans. You know, a lot of part of Canada are remote and not very harsh environments. We have a lot of unique conditions that it really is about that Canadians are the best ones in position uh, to build the kind of products and services for that. So I would argue that yes, we need to build more, not only in here in Canada, not only because there's some issues about reliability, but also because we know the conditions best. We know what is happening up north. We know what is happening when it's the winter months. Um, and defending our country in those kind of really harsh conditions require knowing what those conditions are, building the products for them. So it's really about market insight, really, like, as a country, we know building the right products for the market that we know, which is Canada.
I agree with that, but I also think that we're going to have probably one of the largest increases ever in government spending in one area, which is going to be defense, and we could create a military industrial complex in Canada if we so choose, or we could spend all the money buying U.S. products and European products, and I think we should be spending it on Canadian drones, Canadian jets, or at least jets manufactured in Canada. And to your comment about American control of our military apparatus, the jets that we're buying supposedly we're completely reliant on code that is going to be resident in the United States, and we can't actually repair and maintain them or turn them on without the permission of the American companies. And so I think that that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so we not only have to be self-reliant in manufacturing, we need to be self-reliant in the bloody operation of these things. If they can turn it off at their whim, they're not really very good defensive pieces of equipment.
Yeah, for sure. I think, the way I see this is that it's how can Canada be a better partner to US? And that means that we have control on our defense and that we are able to support, our allies, including US, when the time comes. And I think that is the key driving message that we should be thinking about. And building our own is just one of those ways that we can better support our allies. It's really just basic.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes with some concluding comments with our guest, Arthur Lamb, talking about managed trade versus free trade, what Canada should be doing. And he's effectively saying it's not a philosophical, political concept. He's just saying it's smart business. And he's just taking a look at what's happening and what Donald Trump has done to change sort of the trading rules around the world, and that we've got to be smart about it. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio. I've got Arthur Lamb with us. He's the founding partner of Nexus Strategic Consultancy. He's the author of a really interesting column in the paper recently about Canada urgently needing to abandon its outdated free trade strategies for a more managed trade approach. And he's, I've been trying to challenge him to see if this is a philosophical belief he has, and it's not. It's just that he thinks that Donald Trump has changed the realities of trade and manufacturing around the world, and that we need to be smart business people and think differently. So let me ask you about energy, because there's been a lot of controversy about pipelines and energy, the Keystone Pipeline would have allowed us to ship via pipeline a whole bunch more energy to the United States. But I understand we sell it at like 80% of market prices. And what that does is that allows the US to use some of their energy and refine it and ship it around the world at 100% of market prices. And so we're sort of subsidizing the United States. And some people think we should be shipping more of our energy to the West Coast of Canada, liquefying it if it's natural gas, or putting the bitumen in ships and selling it to Asia and selling it at 100% of market prices. But it costs a lot of money to create those new pipelines. What do you think our strategy on energy should be, sir?
Like any business people, we need to look at Canada as a business, as an entity, and see like, what do we have to sell, right? And the fact is, we have the oil patch with very smart people creating oil, getting oil out of getting oil out of the ground. A lot of hard workers, doing those tasks, and we have an asset here, and we just have to monetize it. We have to make money of it, and it's about like, how do we make the most money out of the asset that we have? The TMX pipeline, Trans Mountain Pipeline, did some of that, because by being able to sell some of the Albertan oil to Pacific, you have actually reduced the amount of discount that we're selling to the US, because there's price competition. So I think that it is really important to think to look at it from that lens. It's really about like providing our products to customers that want to buy it. That include Eastern Canada, that includes European, that includes Asian customers. So pipelines, I think, is there is a consensus that's happening that we will need to build more pipelines. I think that is just a smart business decision.
It is, but I guess the point I was going to try to make is that I think it is the best example of your argument that you made a couple of minutes ago about long-term decision-making versus short-term decision-making. I think the short-term decision was sell it to the United States. It's quick and easy. We don't have to invest in a huge pipeline that goes over the Rocky Mountains. We just have to take it down through the flat lands of the middle of the country, and the Americans will just buy it and they'll refine it and they'll do all the tough work. And so all we got to do is extract it and put it in a pipe and ship it down there. And we lose 20 points off the top, but we're still making good money. And so when you think about it from a short-term payback standpoint, it's probably the easiest and quickest. It's the short-term profitable opportunity to build a couple $1 billion pipeline, to negotiate with Indigenous people, with British Columbia to go either through or above the Rocky Mountains, to then figure out how you actually get it from whatever the state it's in, and then liquefy it if it's natural gas, or take the bitumen and put it into ships that are going to be okay with coastal indigenous bands and environmentalists that are worried about oil spills, etc. That's a lot more work. It's going to be a far
Yes.
longer payback, but it is the right long-term strategy. And so I think that it's one of the best examples of your point that we got to be thinking about things, even if they're more difficult, in the long term rather than the short gains. And too much of free trade was, it's easy to truck to the United States and make money real quick, when the long-term benefit may be something different. And lots of countries around the world, Australia is shipping liquefied natural gas to Europe. So other countries have figured out a way to make these long-term business decisions. So last question, sir. If you were going to sit down tomorrow with Mark Carney, our new prime minister, what would you tell him to do?
I would say, in my article, I argued a couple of things. I argued that we need to have take a managed trade approach. We argue that we need to have specific sectors that we want to sell to market. And the third point that I made was about making trade commissioner services more independent. I think the article speaks for itself. I had the opportunity to meet with Mark Carney. I get the sense that he is a business person that understands how to run a business and that focus matters. And if you look at the way that he laid out, for example, the mandate letters, it was one letter, a few like key objectives, and basically say, it's up to you, Minister X, to execute on my priorities that I have here. So he is already taking a much more focused approach towards doing that. I guess my advice, if I had the opportunity to do that, would be to listen more to on the ground businesses that are not in these rooms not in these rooms that they traditionally have been speaking with, the medium-sized businesses, the small businesses that are just trying to survive, on a day-to-day basis. Companies that are building a car part and all of a sudden they don't have the market. What are they going to do? I think that listening to them, understanding where they have been and where they could potentially go is going to be really key. So really listening to the sectors and the industries, and in terms of crafting the new strategy of how we're going to be an energy powerhouse, how we're going to be a critical mineral powerhouse, how we're going to develop advanced products and services and AI and life sciences. Like, Canada has a lot to offer, but we need a focused strategy. And I think by listening to these companies and organizations that hadn't been in Ottawa, don't know who Minister X is, would be really helpful in creating good public policy that works for the everyday businesses.
Arthur Lamb, thank you so much for joining us today. I agree with you completely. I hope you get the opportunity to chat with our new prime minister about that. And I think that your pragmatic approach that says that, Washington consensus, Beijing consensus, free trade, managed trade. The reality is Donald Trump has changed things, and we've got to do the best that we can in our current business and global trading environment. I think the other thing we need to realize, and we haven't talked about this, but that's the topic for a whole nother conversation, is our geopolitical situation has changed because of wars that are going on and the growth of China and that they may be in a separate sort of geopolitical situation than we are, and certainly Russia has been, and we need to think about that as well, which may not be sort of where we were a decade or two ago, when we just thought that globalization, G7 or G8 and free trade and globalization was the way to go. And so I think being more pragmatic makes a ton of sense. Arthur, really appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and video casts go up on my website, briancrombie.com, on social media, on YouTube, and on podcast servers as soon as the radio show goes to air. So I don't know whether this is managed trade or I'm just trying to exploit as many different ways to get my message out as possible, but there's lots of different ways that you can listen to my shows. So check one out, please. Thank you.
Thank you.